June 11th, 1990, three bodies found in a burning North Abilene home marked the final step in a scandalous murder for hire scheme. On this episode of Cross Examine, we revisit one of the most sensational capital murder cases in Abilene.
Gregory Lynn Summers plots the murders of his adoptive parents, Helen Summers and Mandel Eugene Summers, as well as his mentally disabled uncle, Bill Mack Summers. He hires Andrew Cantu, who gets the job done by stabbing the victims, then setting fire to their home while the bodies were still inside. Both men were executed on death row for masterminding the crime.
Suspects Ramon Gonzalez and Paul Flores played lesser roles, but were able to tell investigators exactly what happened during the triple homicides, and two individuals who refused to participate, Max Aguirre and Keenan Wilcox, gave invaluable insight into how the murder for hire scheme took shape.
From the Stream Center in Abilene, Texas, the home of KTAB, KRBC, and Big Country Homepage, this is Cross Examine on KTAB Plus.
We're here with Miles LeBlanc and Ken Sutton, the original prosecutors with Taylor County District Attorney's Office during the Gregory Summers capital murder trial. Now, when we spoke to you guys, and thanks for joining us today on this episode of Cross Examine, when we first spoke to you guys, you had told Erica, one of our co-hosts, that this is a case that both of you will never forget. Why is that?
Well, it was it was a horrible crime. I mean, it was terrible. You know, here was his loving mother and father, his mentally disabled uncle, and it was just a terrible crime to commit. The other thing is that it was a case that involved 70 witnesses altogether. That included both guilt, innocence, and punishment. And neither one of us had ever come across a case that was so involved with so many witnesses. It was unique.
Mr. LeBlanc, when this case was going on, was it the talk of the town? I could only imagine it was. I mean, it was a triple.
When you guys called me, when Erica called me to talk about this case, that was the question that I anticipated would be asked. And Kent and I tried this case. Was it like about 2 weeks, right, Kent? Right. And we had individual voir dire, which took a while, and then we put on, like you said, the guilt, innocence, and then the punishment phase. Well, there was a break, like, in the case. So this was a change of venue, as you guys may well know, because the original case was tried against Andrew Cantu, the guy who actually killed,
committed the murders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as well as the, like you say, the mentally disabled uncle. And so that case was done. And then after that case was tried, then the Gregory Summers case on a motion for change of venue was tried in Denton, Texas. And so Kent and I were in Denton trying this case. Well, there was that one break, and I remember coming back to Abilene during the break, and the people who I spoke to said this was like the talk of the town. It's like everybody was talking about the trial because it led the news every night that it was being tried. And I think one person, my former girlfriend at the time, told me it was just called the trial or something like that.
The trial.
Didn't even, the
They
trial.
knew what you were talking about.
It knew exactly what the people in town understood what that was about. So it was big news, and because it was a horrific crime, just like Kent described. I'll say this, I've tried a number of cases, a bunch of cases when I was in Abilene, and Kent and I actually tried at least 2 or 3 together, right, Kent? Right. And we got some stories to tell about some of the others we tried as well. But this one, by far, was the most important and monumental case for me as a criminal attorney. Now, since I left Abilene as a prosecutor, I've more or less segued into civil practice. And I've tried some civil cases that were pretty large as well. But this case, criminally, as a criminal matter, was by far the
Yeah, and
it was it. It was it. It was the biggest case.
Some of the reading that I've done about what made this case so interesting to me is I think a lot of the evidence was circumstantial, and you usually don't get such an well, I guess it wasn't an easy conviction for you guys. The trial did last a long time. There were all of those witnesses, but I would say that, you know, you don't often hear about capital murder cases that end up getting convicted just based solely on circumstantial evidence. I know a lot of people tried to even get that conviction overturned and were unsuccessful. So, if you don't mind, if we can just kind of walk through the facts of the case, starting with that day.
Because it started off so sensational. I mean, it started off with a fire in the middle of town, 1500 block to be specific, 1533 Lilius.
Yeah.
This is the middle of Abilene, North Abilene, at that time in the 90s. It started out with a fire.
This is literally, I was telling you before, I'm 2 years old,
You
right
grew up
around the
here.
corner.
I also grew up
I am
here,
a
yeah.
block away. I don't remember this because I was 2 years old, but
But your
a lot of
mom
people
told
do.
you, "Oh,
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
this."
I said, hey, I think we're going to do this case. I don't really know anything about it. She's like, that happened right by where we lived.
With the fire, Abilene Fire Department responded, found the bodies. You guys take it from there.
Well, let me before we get into the facts, you talked about circumstantial evidence.
Yes.
And I remember, I think this is a misconception that the public has. And I remember studying evidence in law school. Circumstantial evidence is merely a type of evidence. It's neither good nor bad. It just depends.
It's just evidence.
On the yeah, it depends on the quality. And you know, just because you have an eyewitness, if that eyewitness was a great distance away, had bad eyesight, or was biased in some way, even though it's an eyewitness, it might not be good evidence.
That's
But
right.
circumstantial evidence is not inherently inferior to direct evidence.
And we'll get into some of that eyewitness evidence, because as you were saying, it's not people who had bad eyesight and who were far removed for the crime. We actually have printed out that we're going to read through parts of testimony from people who were in the house when the murders were happening. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but let's just walk back to the fire. There's this big fire. You guys are at the district attorney's office. I'm sure at this time, did you hear about this fire and the bodies inside and start to think, oh, we have a big case here that we're going to get to work and like get excited? Or what were you guys thinking?
How did you learn about the case?
Yeah, maybe we're making some
Well,
assumptions.
it was. I remember the case when it first, was publicized, and the only connection I had to it was that I knew that there was going to be a capital murder case because 3 people were killed, and the focus initially was on the guy who actually did the killing, Andrew Cantu. And he actually, his murder case, his capital murder case, was tried first, and of course there was a conviction, and I believe I think he wound up being executed like in 1999.
If I remember right, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
And so, so then after Andrew Cantu's case was tried, then it moved over to Gregory Summers, and you're right, Kent's right. Gregory was nowhere around the crime scene, but he was intimately involved in the crime. It was definitely a murder for hire case.
He hired
And
Cantu to
Yes.
kill his
well,
parents.
not only that, he tried to hire other people.
Yes,
Right?
he did.
And so it wasn't like he was like, okay, you're not going to do it. Okay, so I'm going to go get someone else to do it. The guy was, anyway.
He was not quiet about it. He was not.
No, I mean, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. I'll put it that way. And, Kent saying that circumstantial evidence is just a type of evidence, but it was a strong type of evidence in the Gregory Summers case.
Yeah,
And so I think, like I said, to the reporter who asked about this, back in 2006, we were able to piece together a very strong case on circumstantial evidence, and it was enough to convince a jury in a city where this murder did not happen, that these murders didn't happen, to convict and to punish.
Because again, you
with
guys
the
were
death
trying
penalty.
this in Denton, after a
That's right.
motion for a change of venue.
Absolutely. Yes.
And some of this evidence started long before the crime. I mean, as we were saying, Summers was, I guess, never quiet or secretive about his intents. There's even evidence, if we start to look through some of the testimony from our eyewitnesses, there's a man named Ricky Blakely who would do contract work at the home where the Summers family was killed. And he said that he did some painting. I'm reading through this court document.
He was
sorry,
the house
yes.
painter. That's
He was
right.
painting in the summer of 1989, so
Yeah.
probably within several months before the murders took place. And he said that while he was painting, he overheard several arguments take place between Gene, which is the patriarch of the family who was killed, and Greg Summers. And he heard Greg threaten his father twice about burning the house down, and he threatened to do it himself or have some of his friends do it. So, I mean, the evidence has been there since before the crime.
He'd been
even
saying,
happened.
"Yeah, I'm going to do this."
Well, here's what the house painter said. He said, "One day while I was painting, I overheard several loud arguments take place between Gene and Greg." Gene was dad, I'm assuming. During these arguments, I heard Greg threaten his father twice about burning Gene's house down. Greg threatened to do it himself or have some of his friends do it. That came from the house painter before the actual crime. And I'm sure you guys talked to that guy, right? Do you remember talking to a guy who was hired to paint the house?
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the statement, "I could have you killed and the house burned down." And you know what was interesting is, while Summers is in custody, while he's waiting trial, he makes a threat against another inmate, threatening to have him killed. And I remember that the defense had a psychologist who said, when we talked about the Blakely saying, "Oh, I'll have you killed and I could have you killed and the house burned down," their psychologist said, "Oh, that was just bluster. That you can't take that serious." The problem was nobody took it serious enough. And when he was in a punishment phase, when it comes out that he's making death threats against someone else, it was high time to take it serious.
Well, apparently Summers, like Erica was saying, there was some evidence even before this crime that Summers has a history of violence. I mean, he's
Absolutely.
not only making threats against his parents and saying that I'm going to burn your house down, but to the point where Dad even told the house painter that, "Hey, I'm afraid of Greg." And there's even more evidence where he had beaten, I guess, a couple of ex-wives.
He
Erica,
brutalized his wife.
Let me chime in on that.
Go ahead.
One of the favorite parts of the case for me was, okay, so we have individual voir dire, right? So we had a juror who was pregnant, who we had no issue with, because we knew that Greg had this history. He literally, was it kicked or hit his wife who was pregnant?
Just so our viewers have some context, let me read this little paragraph. I think this came out during the punishment hearings, but
yes,
the testimony from various members of Summers' family established a pattern of horrible brutality suffered at his hands. He brutalized his first wife, who was pregnant. He kicked her in the stomach. He terrorized his hospitalized grandmother for money. He battered his young sons. His second wife testified that he beat her and once drove her to secluded woods where he forced her to beg on her knees for her life as he held a gun to her head. Other family members testified that they were scared of him. Evidence was also introduced about him threatening to have an inmate killed, as you guys mentioned earlier. And 2 psychiatrists also testified that he is a continuing danger to society who cannot be reformed. So there is just a lot of, again, circumstantial evidence or just testimony from other people that he was a longtime violent offender before he ever even thought about committing this crime, probably.
Well, think about it from this perspective. All right, so understand that voir dire, the individual voir dire, takes place before the trial starts, right? Before the evidence starts being put on. Greg Summers is sitting literally, 5 feet from us, Ken, because we were literally at the same table, which is an odd thing to happen. Normally, they're 2 separate tables, but anyway. Greg Summers heard this woman who's pregnant come up to the stand, get individually voir dired, and he didn't lean towards his defense counsel and say, you might not want to put her on because if, I kicked my former wife in the stomach while she was pregnant. He didn't do that. He did not do that. He let this woman come on the witness, become a juror. And of course, once we got to the penalty, Kent and I kept saying, we just need to get to the punishment phase. Let's get the guilt innocence. So we can get a capital murder verdict on guilt innocence. They're going to have a tough time on the punishment because we knew all of the stuff that you're talking about. We could get on during the punishment phase, and we did.
Because that's how
the part. Yeah, go ahead.
That's how it's usually done. Where
Yes.
when you get a conviction, then you bring the stuff in the past up
Yes.
that you weren't able to bring in during the trial. You use
Absolutely.
that for the punishment phase.
Absolutely. So Greg didn't do himself any favors by letting this woman who was pregnant as a juror for his trial.
And I don't know if you guys know this. How typical is it for a murder for hire case for the suspect who does not actually commit the crime to be A, found guilty, and B, sentenced to death? Is that a pretty common occurrence in these cases, or is this a kind of an atypical verdict that you guys were able to get?
This is the only murder for hire case I was ever involved in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I was reading, and what struck me about the criminal complaint for Greg Summers is that he was not the actual one who was stabbing his parents.
No.
However, the criminal complaint reads like that. It reads that he caused the death of Mr. Summers by stabbing him. I mean, it reads like he was the actual one that caused the death by stabbing him, and it wasn't him. But I guess that's all has to do with the murder for hire plot.
Yes.
It's just-
yeah, go ahead, Ken.
No, I was just gonna say that's just how we charge those types of cases. If
Yeah.
you're a party to the offense,
Yes.
it's as if you actually committed the crime,
Yeah.
hands on yourself. So that's just a legal way that it has to be charged.
Right.
Very, very interesting.
Let's unpack this a little bit further. There is a suspect who's been sentenced to death, been convicted of capital murder, and he was nowhere near the crime. How in the world does that happen? And we've referenced some eyewitness testimony, and I believe that Summers' conviction specifically is due largely in part to two different criminal informants. And I don't know at what point in the investigation they came forward. Two men named Keenan Wilcox, and I do believe Mr. Wilcox to be deceased at this point. We were unable to locate him, and that's where my trail ended up. And a man named Max Aguirre. And we actually do have a long statement from Max Aguirre, and who Max Aguirre is he is somebody who says that he was approached by both Greg Summers and Andrew Cantu, so the man who hired the suspect to kill his parents and the suspect who actually did the killing. He was approached by both of these, Max Aguirre was, and they asked him and some others to take part in the crime, and Aguirre refused. And not only did Aguirre refuse, after the crime, he gave a lot of information as to what these men were doing. And it wasn't just Andrew Cantu and Greg Summers. There were two other suspects involved named Paul Flores and Ramon Gonzalez who were not allegedly involved in the actual murders, but they were present in the home when the murders were taking place, and they were there to commit a burglary. So why don't you guys talk about Max Aguirre?
And then I want to get into Max Aguirre in just a second, and I don't want to run out of time in this episode.
Okay.
I want to get into that in the second episode. But you brought up Max Aguirre. Max Aguirre was, and you guys said that, I mean, Cantu and Summers were asking others to help. Max Aguirre, and who's the other guy?
Keenan Wilcox.
Keenan Wilcox, who also refused to take part in the murder for hire. But then there were two guys who went in the house with Andrew Cantu who took part in at least the burglary, and you also had their testimony. So you had firsthand information of people who were in the house with Andrew Cantu who actually did the stabbing, and then the two witness testimonies who were they were trying to get help from to help with this murder for hire. So you had firsthand information on inside of the house, and you also had firsthand information on people trying to be hired, people trying to and who refused to help.
That's why I said earlier, and Kent said earlier, it was very strong. We had very strong circumstantial evidence. And what you just talked about is just part of what we had and that we could put on at trial, both in the guilt innocence phase and later, all these bad acts that, and we talked about earlier, could be put on during the punishment phase. So I'll say this, people make a big deal of circumstantial evidence. In this case, I don't know how you could have a stronger circumstantial case than what we had.
Well, did I hear you?
But there's no guarantee that we would have gotten a conviction. Trust me. There was some doubt that we would get it, but we put together this case and we marshaled this evidence in such a way that it was the jury. I mean, it was hard for the jury to come with any verdict other than guilt during the guilt innocence phase.
Well, and it did upstand the appellate process multiple times.
Absolutely. And I'm not surprised about that.
Well, not only did you have these 4 witnesses with some firsthand information, but did I hear you guys say you had 70 witnesses altogether?
No,
Yes.
a lot.
70 witnesses during this trial.
Right.
And I mean, from what I saw, it was witnesses from not only inside the house, but neighbors who saw stuff, people who heard stuff, friends of friends who had some of these suspects who were involved tell them stuff. How did you guys track all these people down, or were they just coming out of the woodworks? It seems like, sometimes investigators or prosecutors struggle to even find connections to cases, but you guys just had so many. Like, where do you even start with that?
We had great investigators. These guys were first rate. Otis Wiley was one of the investigators. He was fantastic. And who else did we have, Kent, that helped us out on the case?
Well, the El Paso Police Department did an excellent job. See, Roger Berry,
Yes.
Gary Heslop. There were
You mean the
I
Abilene
know these
Police
names.
Department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean the Abilene Police Department?
Abilene Police Department. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have.
Mr. Sutton,
He's
you're
been in
in
El
a
Paso a long time. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
wait a minute, kid, where did they come in?
I thought this stretched to El Paso, but it didn't.
No.
Yeah.
He was just,
But you're
But,
talking
the
about
Abilene-
Roger Berry, Heslop. These are members of the Abilene Police Department, right?
Right.
they were great help to us in this case.
So would you say that by the time it made it to your desk, that there was already a pretty compelling case as far as the evidence was concerned against Summers, and you guys just kind of had to sift through it all and figure out how you're going to present it?
Yes,
No,
I think
well-
so.
I think the guilt innocence part, that was true. But Miles and I did a lot of work preparing for the punishment phase. Miles
Yeah.
handled the psychiatrist. We had these 2 women that he was married to, and they told almost identical stories of when they were pregnant, him threatening them with their lives and being physically abusive. And there's no way, these women had never met. One of them lived up in Oklahoma. There's no way that they could have known that their story was identical to the other woman's story. The only explanation was he did this to both of them. And another thing to keep in mind about Keenan Wilcox and Max Aguirre is that they came to the police. I remember Keenan Wilcox came to the police before Andrew Cantu was even a suspect. And so they tell the story of how Greg Summers came to them, told them that his father didn't like banks, kept all this cash, 10 grand in his dresser drawer, and that, if they killed him, they could get this money. It was an identical plea, an identical offer that he made. There's no way they could have known that Andrew Cantu was going to be made the same offer, or was made the same offer later. So, the only conclusion is what they said about Greg Summers was true. That's the only way that they could have known about this offer and later being identical
And-
to Andrew Cantu.
And we are going to get into some of that witness testimony on our next episode. Mr. Sutton, Mr. LeBlanc, thank you for joining us. You're going to join us back on this second episode for Cross Examined for Victor Sotelo and Adam Singleton and Erica Garner. We'll be back on Cross Examined.